You are not going to use force to change anything in Russia. I've heard stories like the decolonization of Russia, which is basically breaking up Russia into smaller territories based on ethnicity. These are just fantasy thoughts in my opinion. People don't understand how Russia really operates. First, Russia is such a huge country with over 20 republics that have their own independent governments. You can compare Russia with republics like Puerto Rico and the United States. Puerto Rico has its own independent government, but the United States is responsible for its security and probably other important bilateral or multilateral arrangements with other countries. Now, many of these Russian republics are independently governed with their own local leaders being in charge. In fact, Russia is so diverse that it has around 200 ethnic groups that make up the entire federation. But the Russian-speaking people make up almost 80% of the country. You could be wondering, how did Russia manage to put up together all these ethnicities under one country? Well, the ancient Russia used to conquer territories, and Tsar Ivan III is the man behind the beginning of Russia's imperial ambitions. Russia, before the beginning of its Tsardom and later empire, was originally known as Muscovy, or the Grand Duchy of Moscow, which existed between 1200s to early 1500s. Russia's ancient imperial ambitions were orchestrated by the fact that its own security and defense was disadvantaged by geography and hostile geopolitics at the time. Russia always found itself fighting defensive battles where enemy forces constantly attacked them from various directions. By late 1400s, Ivan III had officially ascended to the throne, taking over from his blind father. Ivan III also came to be known as Ivan the Great. During this time, Russia had constantly gone through a period of attempted invasions of their land by foreign forces. The major security threat came from the Mongols, who kept attacking and invading part of their territories in the east. And from the west, the Poles, the Lithuanians also did the same by launching offensives. So under the reign of Ivan III, Russia devised an imperial strategy as part of their defensive plan against foreign forces. It's also said that Ivan became the first Russian Tsar. Ivan III had to defeat the Tatars, Mongols, Poles, and Lithuanians. He expanded Moscow's territories and consolidated them. The more they waged wars, the more territories they took. They say that between 1500s up to 1700s, Russia was massively expanding by 35 square kilometers per year. They had developed a strategy to go on offensive by conquering states or kingdoms that threatened them. With the death of Ivan III, his son Vasily III Ivanovich succeeded him. Vasily didn't do much as in terms of gaining territories. He only ruled for about 30 years and then he died. He was succeeded by his young son Ivan IV, who also came to be known as Ivan the Terrible. It's therefore important to note that Ivan IV the Terrible was the grandson of Ivan III the Great. In the early days of Ivan IV, he ruled with the help of regents who formed what they called the Chosen Council. During the reign of Ivan IV, Russia continued its imperial ambitions. By this time, Moscow continued to suffer attacks from foreign forces and constantly found itself on the defensive line. So Ivan IV defeated the Kazan Khanate, the Crimean Khanate, and took Siberia too, forming the puppet leadership there. The Crimean Khanate repeatedly raided Moscow and caused massive casualties. The most popular incident was known as the Fire of Moscow, where the Crimean Khanate ruled villages in the Moscow region and killed over 80,000 people. So Russia had to find a way how to defeat the Crimean Khanate by all means. They also had to take over Siberia because its leadership at the time was increasingly vocal against the Tsardom of Russia. Ivan IV had to overthrow the regime there, replacing them with puppets. Now, the man who totally transformed Russia into a formidable imperial power was Peter the Great. This guy conquered other empires, including putting an end to the Swedish supremacy at the time. During the reign of Peter the Great, he built a powerful navy they used to conquer more territories. And so Peter the Great is such an important figure in the Russian history. The Russian Empire prior to 1900s kept fighting the Crimean and the Ottomans. Russia's wars with Crimean Khanates and the Ottoman Empire were the longest battles they ever fought for hundreds of years. The Ottoman Empire was in fact one of Russia's biggest threats. Two giants couldn't exist in the same field, and so they had to keep fighting each other for hundreds of years. The Ottoman Empire was huge, powerful, and ambitious, and Russia continuously felt threatened. It was Catherine the Great, the only Russian female empress, who defeated the Ottomans after years of deadly fighting. Throughout Russia's history, the only empire that tried to fully subdue them were the Mongols, but at the end, they defeated them. Now let's talk decolonization. The idea of decolonizing Russia would mean disintegrating the current geographical state of Russia into smaller countries based on ethnicity. This would mean that Russia would have to go back to its pre-Saddam size before the 14th century. Such decolonization would also mean forming over 20 independent states out of Russia. So let's be clear here. Is this possible? People need to understand that the government in Moscow found a better way to keep this republic in check. For example, Russia's Chechen Republic tried to secede by launching a series of guerrilla-style wars, but Russia used brutal approaches to crush the rebellion. They used scorched earth methods as a form of punishment, which also would serve as an example to the rest. The Kremlin went ahead and groomed their own loyalists in Chechen and established them as leaders there. If you've heard of this guy called Ramzan Kadyrov, you would understand what I'm saying. Ramzan Kadyrov is basically Russian mafia used by the Kremlin to do whatever he wants other than trying to instigate secessionist chaos in Chechen. He can do whatever he wants, including murdering anybody anytime he wants, and Moscow won't care at all as long as he doesn't go rogue. So one way Russia keeps these republics in checks is installing ruthless leaders like Ramzan Kadyrov and allowing them to do whatever they want, including amassing wealth. The second strategy is that the Kremlin has its own hit squads, probably under the ranks of the Spetsnaz or the FSB, who constantly monitor the behaviors of the politicians in these republics. When they find out that you are going rogue or you're trying to instigate a rebellion against the Kremlin, you will be eliminated within minutes. And so guys like Kadyrov clearly understand the consequences of revolting. This is why they can do whatever they want, but they will never try to go against their masters in Kremlin, as this will mean their end. The third reason is that Russia, being such a huge country, means that a lot of its citizens don't have an open-minded view of the world. Many are still interlocked with the Soviet-style nationalism, and this is something that usually unites these people. For over 100 years, Russians have been programmed by their leaders that foreign forces are their enemies. And this is why it's difficult to change many Russians on things like how they view the war in Ukraine. In fact, most Russians believe that the war in Ukraine is about fighting America, and so they think that the United States is the biggest enemy to their country. The fourth reason why decolonizing Russia is impossible is because many ethnic groups in Russia were left to perform their religions, culture, and things like that. Russia has Muslims, Jews, Orthodox, and other groups. They are free to exercise their beliefs and cultures without limitation. Now, for years, these groups have increasingly found themselves fine with being part of the bigger country, and so it's difficult to convince them to leave. The last reason is about the complexity of the matter. Decolonizing Russia is in fact not in the interest of the United States or the West in general. This is from a security point of view. When you break up Russian Federation into smaller territories, you should also have a plan to contain who will control nuclear weapons. When chaos erupts inside Moscow, various local groups could end up taking over nuclear weapons, which is a security danger to the West. So how can you instigate change inside Russia? The best way to influence the Russian public is for the West to change how the message is packaged. For over 70 years, the West has failed to use the right language that entices ordinary Russians. The problem is that people in the West tend to vilify all Russians. The general vilification of the Russian people is the actual problem here, and this dissuades you from winning their hearts. They have been portrayed in movies as evil, rogue, and things like that. The West needs to find a better way to win the hearts of the ordinary Russians. You need to show them that we are not your enemies, but we don't agree with the actions of your government. So we only have a problem with your government and not the entire country and its people. The second strategy is to fully transform former Soviet countries into fully developed countries. As of now, citizens of these countries keep running to Western Europe for better opportunities, and so this still poses a challenge. A country like Poland largely depends on EU funding, and they are not really contributing anything. If you make these countries economically prosperous, the Russians will start questioning their own government on things like poor economic conditions and things like that. If you like this video and you want to read more about stories like these, you can follow my website and I will leave a link in the description. Thank you so much. You can subscribe to this channel and see you.